Doctor, I understand writing, you're in the period of gestating a book right now. Tell me, what is this book about?
It's about DEI. And what happened was I was going through, I had somebody I hadn't done anything with the files when I retired. So I needed somebody to just sort of loosely put them into groupings for me so I could go through and fine tune and put them in order. And I had not gone through anything she had done. And I ended up looking for something and coming across a bin that she had put all of my presentation papers in. And there was another separate pile for things that had been published. And when I say presentations, I'm talking about every discipline has a professional organization that holds a conference, a national conference once a year, and usually a regional conference. So every year since 1983, I went to my first one, the Academy of Legal Studies and Business in 1982, realized, oh, we're supposed to give papers as academics. I was used to being a lawyer, right? So I know this. And I started presenting papers. And as I went through, I was sort of known, I became known for funny names of papers. The titles were always a play on something.
Yes.
And I realized, Dennis, as I was looking through them, that this was the history of DEI. Because in 1982, I was asked to create the first course in employment law at the University of North Florida. And at a time when nobody knew what this was. In fact, the person who wanted me to do this was the head of the agency that I worked for, the Federal Labor Relations Authority. And he had worked for the head of New York's Public Employee Relations Board, the first head of it. And when that person retired and went to Florida, he started teaching. And it occurred to him that he might be able to do something about something that he had seen the entire time that he was at the board heading it up. And that was that if unfair labor practices about one of two things came up, they were completely ignored. And that was race and gender. And he thought it was horrible, but he didn't know what to do about it. All his labor lawyers didn't know what to do about it. So when he retired and started teaching, it occurred to him that maybe somebody could create a class that might in some way impact this and deal with this issue. So he reached out to the person who used to be his assistant, who was now heading up the Federal Labor Relations Authority. And that person had a whole cadre of labor lawyers again at his disposal. And he called me into his office and asked me if I would be interested in teaching. And I said, no. Strange. I didn't even know he knew who I was. And it was just a strange question. I thought maybe I was getting fired by the head of the agency, which I thought was kind of unusual. And then he asked me, was I interested in moving south, which was even stranger to me. Like, what is this? Where is it going? And I said, no. Then it occurred to me I had a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old that needed to be fed every day. And I was talking to the head of the agency and I needed to come up with a yes at some point. And his next question was, would you allow me to send your resume along with others to this person who is trying to get this class together? So that I could say yes to, because it was like, I know that was going to be the end of that, right? Well, 2 weeks later, I got a call and it was so out of my head until I said, who? It was the department chair. And I'm like, who? What is this about? And he said, we want you to come and interview, to join our faculty. And the rest is history. I mean, I did it. And, I highly believe in the universe sends me what I need, even if I don't know I need it. And it gives it to me in a way that it appeals to me and makes it so it's kind of hard to say no. Yes. So it was hard to say no to the head of the agency. It was hard to go to Florida when it was 80 degrees, and in DC, where I'd grown up and was working, it was 40 degrees, and everything was about half the cost. Basics like food and housing and care for my kids was like half the cost,
Absolutely.
and I would be getting the same amount. So it was like, okay, what's the question here? So I moved, helped. I mean, I ended up creating this class without any help. There wasn't, usually when a professor gets ready to write a textbook, there's another textbook like it around. So, you get some ideas. It's going to be yours, but you at least know where you're going. I had no clue. And that was 12 years later when that happened, because I developed the class. And this is where DEI came in, and came from such a pure place, that the class was very popular. Employment law is what we decided to call it. And it was about Title VII. I realized that's what we were talking about. But even that was a process, Dennis, because I kept thinking, this law has been on the books for 18 years. How could a
Exactly.
bunch of labor lawyers not know anything about this law? And I had also gone back when I got the offer to my office and said to all the labor lawyers, we were there together, and I said, y'all, they want me to teach something called, like, we're thinking about calling it employment law. Like, anybody know what that is? And I told them what it was about, and they were like, nope, never heard of it. 18 years after the law had started. So when I looked, and I used my skills as a lawyer to figure out, like, what is this? What covers this? And I realized I had worked at the White House. I had worked on Capitol Hill. I had clerked at the highest court in DC. So my skills were pretty considerable in trying to see what the landscape was that I needed to explore. And I realized it was Title VII of the Civil Rights Act that had been sitting there in plain view for all this time, and virtually nobody knew anything about it, including a bunch of lawyers and the head of an agency that was responsible in part for claims that would come out under it. So I started the class, did the class for the first year, and that summer was approaching, and I realized I didn't have employment in the summer. I wasn't used to thinking about that. Again, as a lawyer, I get paid 12 months a year, and I work 12 months a year, right? But all of a sudden, I had to think about how I was going to feed my kids in the summer. So I went to my colleagues, of course, and I said, so what do you all do in the summertime for money? And they said, oh, we take money out of our check every month for that. It was like, what? Why didn't nobody bother to tell me? You knew I was coming. I was not coming from academia. I was not used to this. I was coming for practicing law. And they said, oops, sorry. Why don't you try going over to exec ed and see, or continuing ed, and see what they have available, see if they can help you out. And I'm like, what is continuing ed? Turns out, they offer all sorts of seminars and stuff for the community. So I go over there and I say to them, do you have anything I can do this summer? Because I just realized I don't get a check. And they said, well, what do you do? And I said, employment law. And they said, oh, well, work up a brochure. And I'm like, did you hear what I said? I do law. Like, I'm a lawyer. I don't do PR and marketing and stuff like that. So as it turns out, I got it together. It became one of their all-time favorite offerings. They wanted me to do it all the time. Because again, once employers saw that this was something that they were supposed to be dealing with and they could be sued about it, and that was the approach I used,
Yes.
because that was ultimately what could happen, they wanted to come in droves. Well, as we did those classes that were very interactive, and again, now I'm not dealing with students, I'm dealing with people who are actually in a workplace making decisions. And my approach to any talk I give is that this isn't just, 60 minutes, 3 hours, whatever, of us having fun together, which we will do. What it is me trying to prepare you for whatever it is that I've been asked to speak about. I want you to remember this for the rest of your life. And people kept asking, of course I had an agenda, right? And it was basically to track Title VII, because people didn't know what it was. So we'd go over race and gender, and I'd give them cases, and, we'd walk through the cases. Well, they kept coming up, raising their hands about these things that were happening in their workplace. And I believe in really interactive kind of sessions anyway, right? But it was like, we have a thing to cover here. We have an agenda. Like, you're asking me these questions. And then I finally realized these questions are really important to them. That's what I need to concentrate on. So I ditch the agenda and I come in and say, tell me what's going on in your workplace. They would tell me, and then that's what we talk about. And it would have covered everything that I talked about in the agenda. But as we did that, I would ask them when they would tell me what would happen in their workplace that was really problematic in this area. I'd say, well, tell me how you would deal with it. The answer was always something that would have gotten them in legal trouble. And I realized I got to the point where I would say to them, I'd walk in and say, okay, does everybody know that you're not supposed to discriminate in a workplace? And they go, oh, yeah, we know that. And I go, okay, on what basis? And then I'd write those basics down. And then I'd say, so why are we here? If you walked into this room knowing this, why are we here? And they would sort of stop. And it was because you recognize that there's a law that says you can't do it. What you don't recognize is when you may be in trouble or you might need the law. So let's sort of deal with what we're dealing with through that lens. So when they asked the questions and I would ask them, about what was going on in their workplace, and I would say, how would you handle this? And they gave me wrong answers. And it was so consistent. The first few times it was like, okay, that's just that person. But then as it kept happening, and all of it could have landed them in legal trouble with mega money being paid out that I didn't want to happen. Remember, I'm working in a college of business. We want you to be able to not be sued in the first place, right? Or if you are sued, to be able to protect yourself. So finally, I had to just sort of think about what is causing this. And I realized what was causing it is that they were answering these questions based on whatever was in their head, whatever they had learned in life, they were bringing to the workplace. And that's what they were dealing with. And then I had to figure out, how do I get them to the point where they understand what's in their head that may be problematic, that they might need to just sort of hold off on between the hours of 9 and 5 when they're at work, right? Because nobody wants to not only be sued as an employer, but you don't want to be the one responsible for it if you're the employee, especially if somebody had told you like how to think about this issue, you could have done it differently. And that's why wanting to really get in their head what we were talking about was so important to me, because when they went back to work, that's when they had to use it. So it was really important for this not to be a surfacey kind of thing. We had to deal with it in a way that made sure that the next time an issue came up for them in a workplace, they think back to what we said and they think about it again. And one of the biggest rules I told them was that you don't have to answer anything right then. Your favorite, like 7 words or something are, let me get back to you on that one. Because everybody may not know, and you just may need a few minutes to think about it and to think, now, this is what I really want to say. Is that the best thing to do? Knowing what I heard in that session, is this going to get me in trouble? And that few words can save a lot. Well, that became DEI. So I realized, for a very practical reason, which is why I call it practical diversity, that it wasn't enough to just teach the law. No. I had to teach people to think about processing what the law was through what was already in their head so that they came out in the right place. Yes. Now, because I was teaching a course and I was now publishing papers, I was presenting papers, the Academy has attorneys from all over the country who are teaching in all the universities, and they took it back with them. I mean, it didn't take a lot to see there's something to this that we need to pay attention to. And it went from me being the only one presenting papers like this. This Black female is presenting papers on discrimination, right? Mm-hmm. At a time when nobody knew it. And it was like, is that even real? Yeah, it is. And as it turns out, they realized that it needed to be dealt with. But you still couldn't convince publishers, because there were no courses in it, right? So I kept saying, if you have a book the courses will come. People don't have a book to deal with, and everybody's not like me. They're willing to just go out there willy-nilly. And the Hill Thomas hearings happened. And I went from having nobody who was willing to hear it, although they said, that sounds like a pretty good idea, but there's no market, so we don't publish that way, right? Which I understood, to having competing offers on my desk. And if you remember, Dennis, my guess is you probably are as old as I
I'm
am.
76 this year,
Okay.
so I'm very clear
Okay. All
during
right.
this
Well, I'm
time.
74. So we understand
Yes,
history
ma'am.
and how it plays in, right? So that was on a Saturday. It was televised. It had all the big pieces, sex, big high figures, all of that. People were
Race.
glued to their
It had
TV.
race in it,
That's right.
everything that you want, that
Absolutely.
you could possibly have for the hot button
And
issues of the time.
it was that was when you had a TV. That's what everybody was looking at,
I
right?
know. You remember those, a TV? It actually had that reach over
Yes.
to it and
And
turn.
there was no streaming, and everybody's looking at something different on 1,000 different stations, right? It was like you were looking at this. I think I saw a stat that said something like 86% of the American public was glued to their TV that day. Well, so were the publishers. And by Monday, now that was a Saturday, by Monday, we had competing offers on our desk for that book. And they all said, we want a really big chapter on sexual harassment. And that became the birth. Thank you, Anita Hill. I'm sorry you had to go through what you had to go through, but look what it birthed. It ended up being the basis for the publisher saying, we need this book. That book is now in its 11th edition. It has been #1 ever since it came out. And DEI from the beginning was a part of what I put in there. And it was only just a boxed item. And, DEI has gone through a lot of iterations. That's one of the things that I see in my book as I'm going through my papers. And I realized, Dennis, it wasn't just papers. Okay. I said, well, this is the history. I'm going to go ahead and write this up and make it a book, because a lot of people don't know this history. And you could see it through my papers up to today, when I just did an article, a law review article for Mercer University. They are doing a whole thing on intersectionality, and then they invited me to do an article, which comes out, I think, next month. So it goes from 83 up until 2025. But I realized this just wasn't papers for me. It wasn't just papers I presented. It was papers I published. It was letters to the editor about these issues as they were going on. It was journal entries. I had kept a book, a journal. I've journaled since I was 11. I kept a journal on nothing but writing the book alone. And, because I knew that was a singular kind of effort to write this new first of its kind textbook. And all of those pieces, I wrote newspaper columns. I wrote a column for NOW, National Organization for Women, for a couple of years. All of it was real-time stuff about the issues that come up in DEI and employment law. And I thought, okay, this book is more than one book, and that's what I'm working on now. That book is what I'm doing, because people don't know. And this is a real-time sort of 360-degree look at it.
I'm so glad that you're doing that, because right now it is breaking my heart the way, excuse me, I'm an ally here, and you're there because you're the mother of this. And suddenly DEI, they have taken this definition and corrupted it so completely, and taken it out in universities, in the military, in the government. And I need to talk about it, and I need to talk to you about it. I need you to help talk me through this, help me talk me off the ledge, tell me where we're going to go from here, because if anything, DEI is exactly the most important and valuable contribution that we have to our society, from business to government, because our society flourishes under diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's what makes us wonderful. It's what makes us powerful. And to take this definition and to have it so mangled is stunning, and I don't know what to do with it, and I need your help.
The and we are all on that ledge, right? I mean,
Yes,
all
ma'am.
people of goodwill, as far as I'm concerned, are on that ledge for exactly the reasons that you talked about. This has never, and this is why I took the time, Dennis, to tell you where it came from, because that's really important, because that's
Yes,
sort of the North Star. It was never, you haven't heard me yet say the word racism or sexism or homophobia. I didn't care what those things were. I don't care what you call it. I'm a lawyer. Title VII is about not discriminating. If it's because of something in your head, I still don't care. You can hate whoever you want to. Just when you're in the workplace, there's this law that says there's certain things you can't do to groups of people.
sure,
And when I say groups of people, I'm talking about everyone, because there's always been this idea that somehow, now we know why the law was passed, right? Because
sure.
we had 100 years of Jim Crow before the effective date of Title VII. So it was really addressing that, but it did not exclude anyone. If you were white and you got discriminated against, the law protected you, but somehow it was never portrayed as that. And again, the reason I told you about working where I worked before is because those places are not a stranger to me. I worked on Capitol Hill. I know how people can use what's in their constituents' heads to manipulate a position that the office holder wants that doesn't have anything to do with the good of the people.
Yes,
Okay. And that was really very disconcerting for me, because I believe, and I still do, in America and its promise, and seeing it being misused, seeing that these are the people, that we have a representative government, and that these are the people who are sent there to represent us. And they basically don't give a crap about that. They want to stay in office. So whatever they have to do that, they will, even if it's something that harms the country, was very disconcerting for me. And seeing it at the White House, and I worked for an administration that was not, I believe that good ideas don't have a party. So I sort of went into it.
no,
If you asked me, you would have had to push me to tell you I was a Democrat, because I just sort of didn't believe in that.
sure.
So I worked in probably the only Democrat in a Republican White House, and I worked for Dick Parsons, who just died and made international headlines with his death on the 26th of December of 2024. I mean, yeah, 2024. He went on to be the head of Time Warner and Citibank. Wonderful guy, but working at the White House with Dick really taught me about looking at how things are portrayed versus because I was working there. So how they were portrayed in the news versus what it was there as somebody who was working in that White House. So all of this was not foreign to me, but I thought for big things that really, like you said, help the country,
Yeah,
which is why DEI was so good, that they would be on board with this, right? And try to make it work as opposed to being against it. Well, that's not what happened. And because of it, from the very beginning, there were people who opposed it. So a few years later, when they started talking about affirmative action, because the same year that Title VII became effective, they also put an executive order 11246 that said, basically the premise was, look, we're the federal government, and if we pass a law saying you're not supposed to discriminate, we got to be the role model here. So
yes,
if you deal with us in any way and have a contract with us for $50,000 or more, then we're going to require you not only not discriminate against people, but if you do a sort of snapshot of your workplace and see that you've got some serious underrepresentations there,
mhm,
like all of your C-suite people are white and male, all of your cleaning people are Black folk, all of your secretarial or clericals are women, you may need to work on that. Okay,
Yeah.
let's just set some goals that are based on the numbers of people that are available wherever you draw your workplace from. And let's set some timetables. Okay, some timetables. Now, it was better than nothing. But the truth was there wasn't a whole lot of tooth
No, but
in
you had to go from zero. You're going from
exactly.
zero
Yes.
into it, and no change happens A to B. It goes
No.
incrementally. It is
Yep.
we start with this, get a step, move into the piece.
Yep. And that's why that was okay with me. It didn't have a lot of teeth in it, but the truth is it was better than nothing. And I knew,
This is
like
the
I
Ruth
said,
Bader Ginsburg philosophy as she was approaching the Roe v. Wade and all. It was take a step and move rather than right.
yeah,
Do I understand that correctly?
yeah, absolutely. And when you're dealing with a country that's got millions of people in it, that has this idea that we are individuals who get to choose our own, but within a certain framework of
Yes.
democracy, you need to have that because you're not saying this is what happens and everybody has to fall in line. You're saying this is the law. You need some time to kind of figure out what that means, just like with Title VII. It was 18 years and nobody had even figured out that it was out there yet and doing anything
No.
with it significantly. And when you've got millions of people, that makes sense to me. Because,
But isn't it, Doctor,
people worry.
isn't it the Justice Department that would enforce Title VII?
Justice Department deals with government agencies, basically. Okay,
Yes,
so
ma'am.
if it was a police department, if it was a firefighting unit, that's most of their cases that came out of that, right?
Okay.
Then they would enforce it. But ordinarily, it was just up to EEOC. And the thing about EEOC, probably until this administration, was that it sort of does what it does and it doesn't go out to the whole public, or at least not in a way that makes the public know,
No.
oh, the EEOC is doing this again. So the word just never got out. It wasn't because EEOC wasn't doing whatever it needed to do under the law, it was doing stuff. But if it never gets down to us, if it doesn't get down to a bunch of labor lawyers, then something is wrong. And I understand that part of that too was kind of figuring out what their way was. And they were always subject to whatever administration was there. So they would, under Obama, for instance, they got like a 20% increase because they were always chronically underfunded. And when you're underfunded, of course, you have to make your choices about what it is you're going to use your funds for.
Absolutely.
Getting the word out to us, especially before you had things like being able to do a simple email, that just took money. And because of it, they would rather use their funds to deal with big cases that affected a lot of people so that it would be cost effective. That if they spent that money, at least it would affect a lot of people, even if those people did not know it, right? So the whole time this is going on, you've got this resistance. And then when the affirmative action piece comes in, oh, it's on and popping. Okay, from the beginning, it has been a fight. And
Oh,
that
it is
ended
something.
up becoming at some point sort of, okay, we're going to drop this whole thing of affirmative action and instead call it DEI. Well, it was never what they said it was in the beginning, which is why we're on that ledge, because that's who had the bullhorn and that's who ended up taking the day. So from what people knew, it was this thing that took qualified, usually white males out of their jobs that they were supposed to have. Okay, supposed to
Oh
have,
no. Oh no.
and put in Black folks and women and later Hispanics and other groups that weren't qualified. Now, what actually happened with that, and this is one of the things that drives me crazy about this, employers weren't sure what they were supposed to do. And I get that because there wasn't a whole lot to tell them what to do. Okay. And remember, we were coming from when the law was passed, it was 99 years. By the time it became effective in 65, it was 100 years of Jim Crow. And remember, before that, from 1619 up until the war ended in 1865, the Civil War that ended slavery, we had slavery. So literally for the entire history of the country, Black folks were thought of as one way. And then on July 2nd, 1965, this law says, okay, you can't do that anymore. And people had no idea what to do with that. And I get
No.
that. As ridiculous as that may sound, because you're dealing with human beings, I get why you wouldn't necessarily know what to do. So it was going to take a while. When it ended up that people felt so threatened by this, they were grasping at anything. So employers knew, there's this law that says, and between the Title VII and the executive order, there's something that says I'm supposed to have these people in my workplace. Okay. So
Exactly.
instead of just hiring people that they had not even put in the pool before, okay, instead of just opening that up, looking for them in places where they should be, what they did was said, well, I know we're supposed to have a certain number of them, and then if we do, they can't do anything to us. So that became a quota for them. Quotas were never legal under the law. They never were.
It
They
was their
were
workaround.
I can only think of one case in which a quota was imposed, and it was because a union in New York for 21 years refused to deal with a court order. Okay, this wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a court order that told them, you have to admit Black folk. That's the law. You have to do that. And they kept resisting for 2 decades, over 2 decades. And finally, the court said, okay, by this day, you need to have this many doing this. Da, 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 da. That, and like, how many cases do you have like that, right? That's the only time I saw a quota used. The
But yet
quota
it spreads.
part,
Yet they take the
spread like butter.
word,
Yes.
and spread it all across
And
as
can
if
you imagine me knowing what the law is and hearing that over and over like it's real? It drove me crazy. So that became, between that and what politicians were doing, that became what it was in people's heads. And I'll tell you, one time I did a debate, and affirmative action is nothing that I liked. It's like it's the best under the bad situation that we have here. Okay. So, and what it basically said was, you have to try to make right what is showing up now. We understand the history of it, but the truth is you're excluding people now. And we want you to be intentional about trying to include them by doing things like letting them be in the pool of people that you're looking at, not equal employment opportunity. And that is a very different thing. It
it's a
was
different,
never
like
about,
the Rooney Rule in the
yes,
NFL
yes,
that
perfect
required you to
example.
have, you make
And think
sure
about
that you bring people in for the
it.
interview so that you
It
can have it.
doesn't say you have to hire them, which is, a lot of people's problem with it. But the thing is, again, it was better than nothing, right? So instead of doing that, they just took the convenient way out, brought live bodies in, and people were like, okay, I'm not qualified to do this. Like, why am I being hired? But what are they supposed to say? No, I'm not going to take this job. They're figuring, well, you know what you're doing. I guess you'll teach me what I need to know. And of course, the employees who didn't like it they're not going to scream at their employer. So
No.
instead, the heavy becomes the person who gets hired, and all Black folks, all female, are put in that category of, oh, this must be why you got that job, as if it would be impossible for us to perform a job that we're qualified for under any other circumstance. And that was the sort of downside to me, that people look at me and go, why would you even care about that? But I do, because for me, the law was about everyone. And I hated that it gave a certain group of people this expectation that was unrealistic and not based on law, that they were entitled to a job and nobody else was. And you saw this play out in real time in the election, when somebody who had been somebody who had been not only an attorney general of her state, but vice president was called a DEI hire. It's like, what does it take versus
No,
somebody who
I
had,
mean, not only who negotiated during the housing crisis, negotiated against Jamie Dimon, who was a DA and working out so much as you could possibly do. But that is the bastardization
yes,
of the phrase of taking it as if it is as if it isn't. And that, so where do we go from here, doctor?
I
As we're
think a
sitting
couple
here,
of things about that. I think that it's important for us to remember, even this morning, the news said that Trump had signed another executive order saying
Mrs.
take down all statues,
Smithsonian.
back all the statues and all this kind of stuff, all these to these racist people. That was the headline. Um, he's a president. It was an executive order. It can be undone. Okay. I, and you have to find something here that lets you go on. I am.
We have to. That's why I'm asking you.
Yeah. It's 4 years now, only 2 months into his 4-year reign, he has done an extraordinary amount to undo. But I think what you said is tremendously important. This is a multicultural country. We
Thank
cannot
you.
deal without dealing with people who are not white and not male. That just doesn't make sense. That just sounds
No,
crazy. Okay.
it
And
isn't. It isn't. You need talent. I mean, if you just look at talent, you just look. I was looking at
which is all it ever wanted anybody to look at. That's all Title VII wanted people to look at.
the
Just look at
I was born in '48, and I was looking at the Detroit Pistons, the national basketball champions in 1948, and I was wondering how they might compare on the basketball court to the 2025 Detroit Pistons, and to say whether now what is the difference here? What is the opportunity? If we give the opportunity to people, if we give the opportunity to people, what could that possibly mean? And yes, one of the studies that I was looking at, it said that that we went from 90% white male in power down to 80% white male in power, and that's where the freak out came. That 10% drop from 90% to 80% in the power within the both in the government and in the business, and that's where the freak out that men with my complexion and with my background are the ones who are freaking out over this process. And so
Mhm.
there's got to be some kind of a reckoning. And I mean, I saw that beautiful picture with you and John Lewis, and I'm thinking about the arc uh, of justice, and how it's got to be longer, but something is happening uh, in this time where we're taking away where we're taking away that it's not sensical.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense if you're looking for the best talent and you're looking for the people. One of the questions I'm wondering about, doctor, is that, so let's say I'm a business executive and I have a white candidate and a black candidate that are nearly equal, but how could I possibly justify hiring the black candidate at this time?
Yeah.
How could I do that? What would be my in this particular environment? And that scares me.
It scares a lot of people. And the truth is, that's one of the favorite questions people ask me all the time. What do you do if you have two similar candidates? Before I could say, well, look at your workplace, take a thought about whether you have an underrepresentation. If you do and everything is equal, then there are laws that say you need to be intentional about who you hire. And if what you want is the talent, you've got the talent with the black person, and you also are intentionally being more inclusive. That doesn't exclude the black or the white person. What it does is it realizes the reality of these people have been excluded. They would now be excluded now because of race if you did not hire them
Right.
because they're Black and you're afraid. And what you said, oh my God, what you said about the basketball is a wonderful example. And let me tell you, however we come out on this, it is so important for me that we get the question right, that we get the situation right. Are you afraid of being excluded unlawfully? Because I want to protect you if you are. Or are you afraid of not being on top anymore? Because if you think about what happened with basketball, now the numbers, and remember, they excluded from all organized sports Blacks for until probably the 60s, right?
Yep.
Blacks came into football, and the first game they had in Chicago, people rioted that a Black team was going to play a white team. When they came into basketball, they ended up being predominantly Black folks ended up being the ones who were playing it. When what's his name came into golf, all of a sudden Tiger
Yep.
Woods, that became a big deal. Now either we're a meritocracy,
Exactly. A
literally
meritocracy.
or we're not. And if we're
Exactly.
not, then what we are is what? A mirrorocracy. If you look like me, it's okay for you to be hired, but if you don't, that's not okay.
But it's
Okay,
so
just be honest about who we are.
it is, but it's not even smart business, because if you're looking out at
That
you're
made
looking out
Dennis
at your people, you're looking out at your customers. If you don't have a reflection within your upper management of both what your customers are and what you can, we lose when we have this monoculture. And
Yeah.
I use this. I know that this is prosaic, but I'm going to use the example anyway. You take a you go out into a field and you plant the same crop year after year. What happens to the soil? It depletes.
It
It is.
deteriorates.
What happens if you have what if you go out there and you plant many different plants out there, and you have different animals that are going? What happens to that soil? It is enriched. And I believe that our consciousness is exactly the same way. If I have a diverse consciousness and a diverse experience, I'm going to bloom. I'm going to have ideas that I wouldn't have had. I'm going to have perspectives that I wouldn't have been able to have before. It's good common business sense.
Dennis, that may be in the cosmic scheme of things why this is happening. Because we've always had the naysayers, and this is America, that's what we do, we always will. But I think what happens is when it's put to the test, the way it's put now, people have to think about it. Before they just sort of took it for granted. Now you have to think about it, and you think about it and you go, you know what, that's not a good idea. I don't want just people like me at my workplace or doing plays on Broadway or doing TV shows. No, that's not what I want. It really makes you then committed to it in a way you may not have been before. And I'm going to tell you this about workplaces. Employers are not backing off as much as the headlines would lead you to believe. Okay, what they're doing is that they're trying to refigure this because of exactly what Dennis Tardan said. They know it's good for business. They know that you have got to deal with who it is that you're drawing from, and your pool is no longer just these white males the way it always had been. And it's one thing, Dennis, to have done that kind of business before people knew, let's say before the 50s and 60s, when
Yes,
you were in charge. Madison Avenue was real.
it
That's who was
was.
there, right? But after people knew, you've got two generations of folks who have not grown up like that. Who my students are like, okay, I don't even get what the picture is. Why would we want to exclude groups of
Exactly.
people when they bring so much to the table? And that's who's taking over. That's who is going to have to deal with the
Yes, ma'am.
repercussions of what's here. And the thing I hate about that is it's like they're having to start all over again. The good thing about that is it's with a very different mindset than the first people who did civil rights.
Thank you. Oh, all right. That you've given me hope, because I feel that we may have to be starting over, but we're starting over at a higher level than we did before. And I also, Doctor, I use the metaphor is that back during the 50s and the 60s and 70s, we had this white male, the patriarchy, which was very hierarchical. The world is too complex right now to deal with that anymore. It has to be more in a synergistic. It's only through a synergistic that the pie is going to get greater. We cannot work in the zero sum.
And we're seeing that with something like the tariffs. You can't just say you can't take it. And somebody said, with something like an iPhone, it goes through something like 1,500 different countries to be in your hand. Right? You can't put tariff on something and expect that it doesn't have repercussions, because we're too interconnected. As a society, we're too interconnected. Who's going to take out all the pizza parlors? Who's going to take out all the Chinese restaurants? Those are things that wouldn't be here if you only had white males in the thing.
Exactly.
And I don't have a problem with white males. I mean, they are not the enemy to me. It takes all of us.
All of us. It is, and that's what I love about the level playing field, about the concept of it, is because it gives us all an opportunity. And yes, it does mean, as a white male, I'm going to have to work harder. One of the concepts that I realized, that being a white man all my life, I always got the benefit of the doubt. I walk up to a policeman, I have the benefit of the doubt. I walk into a store. Nobody's following me around. I get the benefit of the doubt. Now, I don't realize it. I don't sit here and it isn't until I really understand how powerful having that benefit of the doubt, to go into a job and an employment, and automatically get walked into the HR department, and to have that benefit of the doubt. It's an extraordinary privilege.
It really is. And a very powerful one. Some of my favorite stories from my students are from students who did not realize that they had it. Through the course, realize it. And it's not about politics. It's about learning a law. And again, what's behind what it is, how we make our decisions, right? So on their own, they come to a very different place. And I had one student who went into a Mexican restaurant and placed an order, and the people behind him, he said they were all in town for this big event for football. And when they were asked, do you want this seasoning, that comes with a Mexican thing, like some sort of sauce? They said, why would we want that shit, that Mexican shit? I'm like, did they understand they were in a Mexican restaurant? Like, I don't understand the question. So my student heard this, and he was just standing there waiting for his order. And he's a white male, and he turns around to them and he said, Dr. B, I have to tell you, I thought about class and I thought about what you would do in this situation. He said, and I turned to them and said, I don't understand why you would say something like that. This guy's just doing his job. He asked you if you wanted the sauce. If you didn't want the sauce, all you had to do was say no.
No.
So they looked at him, and he said he was sort of surprised that he did it himself, right? And because there were 3 of them and just 1 of him. But when the management came over, because they saw that there was this sort of, kerfuffle going on, they asked if they could comp his meal. And he had said, I didn't have any money. I couldn't even afford the sauce. He said, I told them, no, give it to them. And he said, I thought about it. And the reason I thought about it was because even if they ignored what I said, they would remember that a white male turned to them and not only said what he said, because nobody else in the restaurant had said a word, but I gave them a meal, a free meal. He said, if they don't remember anything else, they'll remember that. Now, what was funny was that he said to me, I was really surprised I did that, but I realized we all have a role in this. And it was like, yes, you do. This isn't just about a fight for a group of people. And he said, I called my girlfriend. Listen to this, Dennis. He said, I called my girlfriend and told her. And she said, you do know I'm Hispanic, right? He said he had not even thought about that. It hadn't even occurred to him that he basically had a dog in this fight, right? Hadn't
Oh,
occurred.
I mean,
But learning, and that's why it's so important for them to take this out of universities, because when you know better, you do better. And they don't want if that 20%, and that's a very standard kind of different number of the gap, right? And the same thing goes for a community. If more than 20% of it becomes minority, all of a sudden the white folks start moving out. Okay. The same thing with schools. They don't want you to know because they like this meritocracy as opposed to the meritocracy.
yep,
And I'm like, just get better then, right? If somebody is beating you out because of qualifications,
get
go back and get some more
better.
qualifications. Isn't that
Get
what you would have done ordinarily if it was a white male? Yeah,
exactly, but it's so hard. But
yeah.
doctor, it's so hard. It's so hard to when we have privilege. It's so hard for us to sit there and to say, okay, as white males, and to be able to say, what do you mean I have to work harder? I'm working as hard as I possibly can. It doesn't, and it doesn't make sense, but it gives us an opportunity. And one of the things that is so key in you, and one of the words that I really want to emphasize is empathy. Because
Mhm.
when you so much of your work is based around empathy, putting ourselves in someone else's shoes and really being able to see that. And this word has really been diminished in the current government as to how we're able to see it. And I should you allow me to have another reasonably spontaneous conversation with you, I would really like to dig into empathy and to
Absolutely.
talk about that on exactly how not only the value of it, but the absolute essentialness of it.
Yeah.
And how
Yeah.
can we even look at those who follow the Judeo-Christian Bible or correct? It's full. Empathy is exactly the key, and the key to Jesus and Jesus's teaching and how it's been brought down. It's absolutely looking
Basically,
at
every religious leaders.
every religious. You're right.
Right? Right?
In Islam and in Buddhism and all, empathy is absolutely the essence.
Absolutely. And if
Thank
I
you,
can
doctor.
have it, and my ancestors were all just, I mean, literally, we're talking about my grandma's grandparents, right? If they were all slaves, and I can end up having empathy for what people are doing to still keep people down,
Yes, ma'am.
then I don't know why we can't all have it.
Thank you. And that's really where the key comes. Thank you for today, doctor. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. When I when Renee was able to find you and be able to our executive producer and the director is able to find you, I knew that this was one of the high moments of my life to be able to meet you, because this is truly a foundational issue to our society, our entire society right now, to everything that we're doing on how our perspective is. And I want to thank you for all the hard work and the miles and the places that you've taken from when you went to Florida with your two small children and and I love the story, the pediatrician. We'll talk about that at another time too, and and to be able to see what you're doing and to honor all of the work that you're doing, and to know that I will spend the rest of my life, and we will spend the rest of our media platform on making sure that your work is honored, because it's the right thing to do.
Oh, Dennis, thank you. Thank you so much. And coming from the master interviewer, that is an awesome thing for you to say. And I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, doctor. We will see everybody. Well, thank you everybody for joining us on Reasonably Spontaneous Conversation, and we'll see everybody next time.
Okay. What fun, huh?